90s full has always been full of people trying to like get one over the next guy and just trying to make a buck off other people. So, this is just the latest iteration of this. Instead of trying to sell people land in the Everglades, we're selling them crypto.
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Andrew Otazo, a writer, marketer, and environmental activist in Miami, who writes with both unsparing clarity and affection about his complicated city. My conversation with him about what makes Miami tick and what most of America doesn't understand about it is coming up. Also, in our arts and culture segment, we'll be talking about pop singer Hayley Williams and her own complicated thoughts on her own city, Nashville. But first, the news roundup. Last week marked the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. President Lyndon Johnson signed the landmark bill on August 6, 1965, surrounded by congressional and civil rights leaders, including the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. The law guaranteed the right to vote for all Americans, regardless of race, and offered specific enforcement mechanisms. Johnson called it, quote, a triumph for freedom as huge as any victory won on any battlefield. But that victory has faced resistance ever since, and its anniversary passed without formal recognition by the current occupant of the White House, President Donald Trump. More ominously, it came just a few days after the U.S. Supreme Court signaled its intent to re-examine the core remaining protections of the law. As we've discussed here in past episodes, the court's conservative majority has already weakened the Voting Rights Act in several ways. In 2013, in the case of Shelby County v. Holder, the court effectively did away with a core component of the law, which had subjected 9 states and assorted cities and counties to what it called pre-clearance for any changes to voting rules. Basically, they had to get federal certification that changes would not negatively affect racial minority voting power. Most of those states were Southern: Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Texas, and Virginia, along with Arizona and Alaska. In writing that 2013 decision, Chief Justice John Roberts argued that the states in question had sufficiently addressed their legacies of racial discrimination, as evidenced by black voter turnout rates that equaled or exceeded white turnout. In a dissent, liberal Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said Roberts was essentially rolling back the law because it had been effective. She wrote, "Throwing out pre-clearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet." And indeed, as soon as pre-clearance was repealed, many of the states that had been subject to it rushed forward with a range of new voting restrictions and requirements, including mandating more rigorous forms of identification and closing or consolidating voting locations in areas that served large minority populations. Last year, a study by the Brennan Center for Justice found that, as Ginsburg had feared, black voter turnout had declined by an average of 5 percentage points between 2008 and 2022 in the states that had been covered. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court in 2021 further fenced in the Voting Rights Act in a case called Brnovich v. Democratic National Committee, which upheld 2 changes to Arizona voting rules, even though the court acknowledged they could have a disparate impact on minority voters. The ruling held that just having disparate racial impacts wasn't sufficient to prove a violation of the Voting Rights Act, as long as the requirements themselves were broadly reasonable. Then last year, the court allowed a South Carolina congressional district map to remain in place, even though the precincts were drawn in a way that diluted black voting power. State officials argued that they were trying to reduce Democratic voting power and that the racial impact was just an effect of most of the state's black residents voting for Democrats. In the 6-3 majority decision, Justice Samuel Alito said that to prove a violation under the Voting Rights Act, plaintiffs had to show that racial discrimination was the primary aim of the district map rather than a side effect of it. Of course, there is something missing from this reasoning. In holding that courts can't rein in gerrymandering for partisan rather than racial reasons, Alito sidestepped the question of why black voters tend to vote much more for one party than the other. Theoretically, then, a political party with an explicitly white supremacist platform that drew congressional boundaries to maximize its supporters' voting power would not be engaging in race-based gerrymandering, just in good old-fashioned partisan politics. Still, even with all of these limitations, the Voting Rights Act has continued to be a stumbling block for some southern states. As we discussed last week, Alabama had 2 different congressional maps shot down by federal courts in 2021 and 2023, and was ultimately forced to accept a court-ordered map that created a second black majority district in the state in 2024. That means black representatives now hold 2 of Alabama's 7 congressional seats, in line with the approximately 30% of the state population that is black or multiracial. The state is continuing to appeal the more racially balanced map, but it was just upheld again this past Thursday by a federal court. A similar remedy was ordered by a federal court in Louisiana, which struck down a map that created only 1 majority black congressional district out of 6, in a state where 1/3 of the residents are black. A new map approved after much legal wrangling took effect last year, and, like Alabama, Louisiana now has 2 black members of Congress, both of whom, not surprisingly, are Democrats. But as soon as that new Louisiana map was adopted last year, a group of white voters in the state filed their own lawsuit. They argue that in deliberately creating a majority black district, something states across the country have done for the past 60 years in an effort to comply with the Voting Rights Act, state officials actually engaged in illegal race-based gerrymandering themselves. In other words, the lawsuit is alleging that legislative and judicial attempts to take racial representation into account are themselves racist. This turns the logic of the Voting Rights Act on its head and robs it of its original intent, which was obviously to protect the long-denied rights of racial minorities. But it is, of course, in line with the Trump administration's aggressive moves to roll back diversity efforts on many fronts, on the largely specious grounds that they are actually discriminatory against white people. It is also in line with the Supreme Court majority's theory of a, quote, colorblind constitution, in which taking race into account in any way can be branded as racist. Now, the court has not yet taken that argument to an extreme. Although it has rolled back affirmative action efforts in university admissions, it has also continued to uphold at least some tenets of the Voting Rights Act, including in the case of the Alabama redistricting map just 2 years ago. But the Louisiana case raises the prospect that the conservative majority may be preparing for a more frontal assault. Although the court heard arguments in the case in March, it ended its session in June without delivering a ruling, saying it wanted to hear more from the parties in its next term. And on August 1st, just a few days before the anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, it asked for new briefs in the case, with a particular focus that rang loud alarm bells among civil rights advocates. The justices want to hear arguments about whether the deliberate creation of a second majority black district in the state violated the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. Those amendments, adopted right after the Civil War, prohibit the federal government and states from denying or limiting the right to vote, quote, on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, unquote. Now, the Voting Rights Act was adopted specifically to ensure that the rights in the 14th and 15th Amendments were actually enforced and protected, as they largely had not been for the first century after they were added to the Constitution. If the court ultimately uses those amendments to say that states cannot consciously try to preserve representation for racial minorities, it would be quite a piece of rhetorical jujitsu. It could theoretically free up states to draw political districts to favor any group they want, as long as they frame it in partisan rather than explicitly racial or ethnic terms. Of course, we won't know how that case turns out until the court's next term, but the call for the new briefs has some observers fearing the worst for the future of the Voting Rights Act. And should Louisiana ultimately be blocked from creating majority black districts, Alabama and probably many other southern states will be right behind them in seeking relief. Okay, now we're to my interview with Andrew Otazo. He is a Cuban-American writer and communications strategist who was born and grew up in Miami. After living in other parts of the country, including Boston and Washington, D.C., he decided there was literally no place at all like home. His resume is diverse and hard to summarize. After graduating from high school, he spent 2 years as a cadet at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point before earning a degree in political science from the University of Miami, where he also earned a master's in international administration. He has at various points worked in a local congressional office, as an intern at the U.S. State Department, as principal assistant to Mexican President Felipe Calderon, as a researcher at the Harvard Business School, communications director at Miami Forward, a progressive outreach effort around the 2020 elections, in strategic communications roles with corporate and nonprofit organizations, and now as founder and CEO of ARO Communications, which works with clients in the private, nonprofit, and political sectors. He is also the founder and author of a multi-pronged project called the Miami Creation Myth, a book, website, and social media account that subjects his beloved and complicated hometown to searching analysis and scathing satire, leavened with deep and irrepressible affection. And he is a one-man environmental cleanup crew. He has personally removed about 15 tons of trash from Miami's mangrove swamps, and in 2019 he completed the Miami Marathon carrying 35 pounds of that trash on his back to raise awareness and money for local environmental efforts. He is a thoughtful and entertaining guide to one of the South's most complex, not to say bewildering, cities in one of our largest and most powerful states, and that's why I wanted to talk to him. One note, we were both in Miami at the time of this interview, but for logistical reasons it worked best to conduct it online. The connection was a little muddy, so I apologize for the sound quality, but I think Andrew's insights more than make up for it. So Seth, let's go to the tape. So Andrew Otazo, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I have been in Miami now literally for 36 hours. That's my sum total of direct experience. But I think like a lot of Americans, maybe most Americans, for most of my life, I have had an idea of Miami. And you can imagine what that has been derived from TV shows, movies, and pop music and so forth. I mean, I think it's one of these places that occupies space in the American imagination. So to start off with kind of a big picture question, because I think this is something that you get at in various ways in your work. What do the rest of us just like not get about Miami? What do people who think of it as the place of, you know, Miami Vice or Miami Beach or Miami Sound Machine, missing about the reality of what the city is and how it works?
So those aspects of Miami that you just mentioned are part of the city, but they're a very small part of the city, like 5% or less, I would estimate. For people who aren't familiar with the city, the way that, you know, people living here for a while or who were born and raised here are, I would say that first and foremost, Miami is a world unto itself. It is the capital of Latin America. It is 70% Latino. Its culture is very heavily influenced, not just by the Latino population that living here, but also Haitian Americans, people from all over the world. Really, it is a very international city, but also it is a city that is designed to be consumed. So it is not a city designed for its residents at all. It is a city like those aspects that you mentioned are like fetishized versions of Miami that are marketed to people to come here and to basically spend their money and leave. And the entire city is built around them. So we don't have a very good public transit system. Our rent is out of control. We're missing tens of thousands of units of housing. It's very difficult to live in Miami unless you are part of the very wealthy class here. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle for most people, and most of the economy is designed around service. So it's a service economy, servicing those tourists that come here. Lately, within the last several years, it's switched more to crypto and finance and all these other things. But that's really more part of Miami's very long history of being a very fraudulent city. So, you can go back to its very foundations, its boom and bust cycle, its real estate bust, especially. Um, Miami's has always been full of people trying to like get one over the next guy and just trying to make a buck off other people. So, this is just the latest iteration of this. Instead of trying to sell people land in the Everglades, we're selling them crypto. So that's very, very, very brief description of Miami.
Well, and so you grew up here, obviously, and you moved away and lived in various other places for a little while, and then obviously decided you wanted to come back. I'm curious what, I think a lot of times when people move away from a place, in a way that place becomes clearer to them from a distance. And because Miami is so distinctive and unique,
Yeah.
no place else you can go that is like it in so many different ways. I guess what did you realize about it when you moved away, and what was it that drew you back?
I realized a lot of things. So I'm Cuban American. I'm a white presenting Latino, and I grew up thinking I was white. And I thought that my upbringing was standard for the United States. And then I went to West Point, out of all places, for college, and that was just the largest culture shock you could possibly imagine. And I was sometimes violently informed that I was not part of the whatever majority culture. Um, and that gave me a big shock for sure. And it taught me that my upbringing and um, I guess, my lodestones are are very different from most people in this country, and there's people that can appreciate that and people that don't, to put it lightly. And it made me realize that Miami's, and again, it's not just that one experience with West Point, but having lived in Boston, DC, traveled all over the world. I lived in Brazil, I lived in Argentina. Um, I've realized how special this place is to me. So even though as I stated at the outset, Miami's not built for Miamians, it's to my sometimes my detriment. It's the only place that I feel comfortable. It's the only place where I can be myself fully. And so it has this deep cultural draw for people who were raised here, that leave and they feel like it's almost like gravity, like they need to come back to be fully themselves. Some people don't. They leave and they're happy, and they're happy to come back on the holidays, but a lot of us feel this draw back to the city because it is so unique.
And one thing that stands out to me about I got a copy of your book
Oh,
an autographed copy
thank you.
at
That's right.
Books and Books bookstore here the other day,
Mhm.
and I won't pretend to get all of the references by any means.
Yeah,
One thing that strikes me about it is that this is very much a book for and about people who are here. Like it's not designed to be a guide for the rest of the world.
right, right.
But so you talk about this as a city that's kind of in a lot of ways not for its residents. You've been very critical of the power structures here and the way that the city is kind of run. I guess why is that? Like why? Because you would think, I mean, city governments can be good or bad for a lot of different reasons, but their kind of core function, theoretically at least, is to serve their actual residents. If that's not always the case in Miami, why is that, and how, like, who are those forces attuned to serving, if not the people who are actually here?
Yeah, so that's a very complicated question. And to get into that, you have to go into history and urban planning and just the power structure that you find here. But since it's upset in since it's I'll say it again. Since its inception, Miami has been an extractive city to the people living here. So if you go back to again, people have been living here for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. but since Miami was founded as a city officially within the United States, it was built by Bahamians and other, people from, other Black populations from the South, other Black Islander populations, or from around the Caribbean, and they, they it's really messed up. So their populations were used. They were counted as part of Miami's official population in order to hit a certain threshold to be considered a municipality in the United States. But as soon as that was done, they were completely disenfranchised. So, for example, they built Miami Beach, but it was a sundown law, or it was a sundown town. So Black people were not allowed within city limits after sunset without a pass from their employers, or they could be lynched. So from its very, very inception, there's been a class of people that have benefited from extracting, for lack of a better term, value from people farther down the totem pole. And, up until the 1960s and the 70s and the 80s, this was largely a white upper class, right? But then you have this massive influx of first Cuban Americans, well, then just Cubans. There weren't really Cuban Americans. Cubans, followed by all sorts of other populations from around Latin America, Dominicans, Colombians, Venezuelans. And what happened was that you had the top of that socioeconomic pyramid, you had the the white population at the very top. They left Miami. They didn't want anything to do with us, but this new Latino upper class just kind of slotted right into it, and the rest of the pyramid remained unchanged. And that's really, and along with the wonderful cultural aspects that I loved so much about the city, there's a darker side um, to this culture that was kind of imported from Latin America into Miami, which is an even more, if possible, extractive sense or culture where you don't have I have to remind people that Miami is a very young city, and that it's not like Boston or Chicago or DC that has centuries of civic culture. It doesn't. But what you did see was an importation of this culture from Latin America that's even, that is always trying to get something, is always on some scam, essentially. So if you look at the rule of law in Latin America, it's mostly laughable. And it's a powerful interest at the very top that control everything. And that's very similar to here. And the most powerful interests here are financiers and developers. This is an economy that's built around, yes, service and tourism, but also real estate. From its very start, it's been real estate. So, these interests basically capture our local officials, and they do their bidding, and everything. It's just also, Miami is one of the most fraudulent cities in the United States. Like, it is the capital of healthcare fraud in this country, and political fraud, and like, you name it, we got it. Um, so that's part of it, and then there's an ugly side to our political culture here, which is you know essentially you have these dynasties who keep getting voted into office, and the people who vote for them do it out of habit, really, and it's kind of just like, oh, they're one of us, right? So we're going to keep voting them in, and we're not going to, vote someone. There's also, once you smack on the label of socialism or communism, like, to anything like that's remotely progressive, say an affordable housing program, or anything along the effects that would start to address Miami's most systemic problems, then it just like dies. So it's very easy to just kill proposals for like more public transit, for example, or any, and it's all local interests, right? All politics is local. This is hyper local. So yeah, it's a confluence of so many different factors that make Miami a city that, it works if you want to stay in, downtown or Brickell or go to Miami Beach or go to Wynwood or Edgewater, basically anything east of I-95. But if you live west of I-95 or you live toward the north or the south, then, you're kind of screwed.
So, tell me about the Miami creation myth. What prompted you to kind of start that project? Was it a way for yourself to kind of try to figure out the city and come to terms with it? And what kind of reception have you had to all of that from people here?
Well, I'll start with the reception first. It's been wonderful. Um, I won an award for the book. It's an International Latino Book Award for Best Fantasy Novel. So I got, national recognition, which was nice, and it's sold really well in Miami. It's we have an independent bookstore here called Books and Books, and they're really the anchor of the local literary scene, and it's the best-selling independently published book they've ever sold. So that's great. So, the reception has been really good. Um, and I think it's because I wrote it from a place of, I come from a certain culture in Miami, a Cuban American culture, but that's not the only culture of Miami. There's so many different ones. There's the native cultures, the Seminole and the Miccosukee. There's the Black culture, which can be subdivided so many different ways into Haitian, Islander, Trinidadian, whatever. You have, a large undocumented population here. You have Colombians and as well as Argentines, Mexicans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to represent as many of those cultures as possible. And in order to do that, I had to partner with members of these different cultures to help check me and help me course correct on these different chapters dealing with their communities because I'm not a member of their community. So that's why it took me 7 years to write because of these different collaborations. And it's written in 11 languages and dialects with footnotes in English. So, I speak three languages. I speak English, Spanish, and Portuguese. But I don't speak Miccosukee, and I don't speak Haitian Creole, and I don't speak Jamaican Patois. But I know people who do, and they help me put that together. But basically, the concept around the Miami creation myth is that, just like the Greeks or the Romans, the Egyptians have their own mythic cycles, their own legends and creation myths. I did that but for Miami because it is such a globally unique city, like you said, like New Orleans, um, that it deserved its own like mythic cycle. And so that gave me an opportunity to explore its history and its culture and in a satirical, humorous manner. And just, everything that is in the book is a reflection, as all satire is, of reality, but from a very Miamian lens, because if you look at how Miami is portrayed in mass media, whether it's the newest Grand Theft Auto video game coming out or Miami Vice or whatever, that's not the Miami most people live. Like we don't experience any of that nonsense. But I think that's why I've received a good reception, is because like this, like you said, this was a book written for Miamians from someone who understands our city.
Your mangrove swamp cleanup project, what did that arise from? And also in the broader sense, I mean, Miami is clearly one of the most environmentally vulnerable major cities in the country. I mean, it always has been because of
Mm-hmm.
hurricanes and flooding, even before we get to the modern era of climate change. Uh, so I guess how do you see the levels of environmental awareness and action here, given all of the threats that the city obviously faces?
Right. So I've been exploring the mangroves since I was 13 years old. They're a habitat that I absolutely love. And it was actually my partner who prompted me to begin picking it up. I took her out there years and years and years ago, and she saw the trash, and she suggested like, oh, why don't you start picking this up? And I was like, no, there's just going to be more trash next high tide. There's no point in doing this. But I don't know. Eventually, I just got so upset that nobody was doing anything, that I just started picking up trash. And 31,000 pounds later, here I am. Um, my work in the mangroves is sometimes a reflection of I don't know what else to do. There's so many systemic problems, right, that are facing my city. I can't do much about sea level rise, or if we get smacked by a Category 5 hurricane. I can't do much about what's going on at a national level regarding, say, degradation of the Everglades with alligator Alcatraz, or just, the horrible things happening to so many people in this country who are undocumented or even who are documented. I can't do anything about that, but I can go into the swamp and I can pick up trash and I can raise awareness of this issue here in South Florida. And I think I've done a decent job of doing that, along with many other individuals and organizations who are also doing it. And the really nice thing about this work is that one, I can just kind of do it and see the effects, like the positive effects of my work on a daily basis. And two, it's not political. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on. I've talked to literally monarchists to anarchists, and they're all on the same page. Yeah, we shouldn't have trash in the mangroves. So that's really refreshing. And I've seen a growth in awareness in Miami of the importance of protecting these environments, not just the mangroves, but the Everglades and Biscayne Bay and all these different habitats that are interconnected over the years. So that's been really nice to see at the very least.
You talked about how young Miami is as a city, which I was honestly struck going back and looking at the population census for Miami that there were only like 5,000 people in Miami in 1910, I think.
Right.
At the time you get to 1950, there's, I don't know, a quarter million, and now there's what, 2.8 million people in Dade County overall. Uh, so, as you say, maybe civil society hasn't, in a way, been able to keep pace with just that massive growth. And you've been engaged in various kinds of political and communications and organizing efforts. Is that changing? Are there the roots anywhere of a stronger civic and civil society that might be able to grapple with all the things that the city is facing? Like, is is there hope there?
Um, that's a very good question. It's a very good question. First of all, you bring up a great point. There's more people living in Florida in 1491 than there were in 1900. For some perspective. Um, Here's the thing about Miami civic culture and about our systemic issues generally. The solutions to these problems are not going to come from the top down. They're not going to come from our political class because even there are politicians in the city that I do agree with and I do support, like the mayor of our county, Danielle Living Cobb. I think she's doing the best she can. She's doing good work. But you have a structure where you have 30 something municipalities in this county, and each one has their own commission and their own mayor and their own interests, and they often don't align. And so they don't collaborate well often. Um, I think that at a base level, the change that we need, I don't know, obviously, I have no idea if Miami is going to get its act together and be able to solve its most pressing issues, which are existential, related to climate change. Not to mention income inequality and housing and transit and all sorts of other problems that we have here. But I can tell you that if we do, it'll come from the bottom up. It's going to be at the grassroots level. It's going to be a demand, an insistence um, on our elected leaders that if they don't address these issues, then they're going to get booted out of office. I don't know when that's going to happen. I would love it to happen. I'd love for it to happen soon, but it's a very entrenched system. So that's if I wasn't an optimist, then I wouldn't be living in the city, and I certainly wouldn't be doing my environmental and civic and political work in it. But you know, I don't I don't know. Maybe it's a Sisyphean task. I don't know. We'll find out together.
So I guess to wrap up, I would just ask for people who do come to Miami, because lots of people from outside Miami come to it, or come to Fort Lauderdale, or come to the surrounding area. Is there anything that you would encourage people to do to kind of break out of those obvious touristy bubbles, like to get some sense of uh, sort of what the real Miami is? How should people approach this city if they
Sure.
learn about
Yeah. If you want to, Miami is so rich culturally, and I do encourage anyone who wants to visit here to get out of that bubble, which is mostly along the East Coast. Um, you know, sure, go to Miami Beach and go to, I don't know, Wynwood. They're great. But also check out Little Haiti. Go to historic Overtown. Go down to Homestead. That is a completely different. I mean, it's a drive, but it's worth it. It's agricultural. It has incredible fruit markets. It's just a really awesome place. Check out our nature. Go, scuba diving, or not scuba diving, if you don't have a license, if you don't have a what's it called? Well, I guess a license. Go snorkeling in Biscayne Bay. Go down to, visit Biscayne Bay National Park. Go out to the Everglades. Walk the Anhinga Trail. See more of Miami than just what's in the tourist photos, right? You go out to Doral. That's like the center of Venezuelan American culture in the United States. It's incredible. Check out local spots. Don't freaking don't go to Bayside Marketplace, which is just like this just depressing 1980s era, mall. Go, patronize local retailers and restaurants and check them out, and go to a Ventanita, get some Cuban coffee. It'll keep you awake for days. So yeah, just go outside of the normal um, well-trodden paths in Miami, and you're gonna find incredible stuff.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. So, Andrew Otazo, thanks so much for talking. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
If you've been a rock, emo, or pop punk fan in the past couple of decades, you are probably familiar with Hayley Williams. As lead singer and songwriter for the band Paramore, Williams shot to stardom as a teenager. The band's second album, Riot, released in 2007, has sold more than 3 million copies and remains a millennial touchstone. Williams has guided Paramore through 4 more albums and almost as many lineup changes since then, evolving a more mature musical and lyrical style. The band's self-titled 2013 album is my favorite, ranging from epic rock to punchy pop and wistful ballads. It also includes their biggest hit, the R&B-tinged single Ain't It Fun, which hit the Billboard Top 10. Ain't it fun? Williams has also in recent years pursued a solo career alongside her work with the band. She released the latest efforts under her own name just a few weeks ago, dropping a set of 17 songs, which she refers to as individual singles rather than a coherent album. They range pretty widely musically, but 2 of the songs stand out for what they say about Williams' hometown of Nashville and the forces that are reshaping it. One is called Ego Death at a Bachelorette Party, and it starts like this. I'll be the biggest star at this racist country singer's bar. No use shooting for the moon. No use chasing waterfalls. In subsequent verses, she targets the Music City's bachelorette party industry and its tourist-fueled karaoke bars, with a repeated refrain of, "Can only go up from here," suggesting that Nashville has reached some kind of spiritual low point. The laments are familiar to anyone who's watched Nashville's explosive growth over the past 20 years, and in particular the crass party trade of the lower Broadway district downtown. There are a bunch of bars and restaurants owned by country singers there, including Jason Aldean, whose controversial anthem Try That in a Small Town became a right-wing rallying cry in 2023. Williams' song is not inherently political, except in a general anti-racist, anti-corporate sense, but the video for it nudges in that direction. It features a cameo appearance by Nashville State Representative Justin Jones, a Democrat who was famously expelled from his seat 2 years ago by the State House of Representatives Republican majority for leading a short protest of state gun laws on the House floor. Jones was promptly appointed back to his seat and then reelected to it, gaining national celebrity along the way. In Williams' video, he sits quietly by the Cumberland River as she sings the song's hopeful chorus. The video also includes an image of Williams writing, "I still believe in Nashville" on a bathroom wall. Another song in her new collection, True Believer, is even more pointed, about both Nashville and the South more broadly. Williams grew up in a conservative Christian family, and early on Paramore was tagged as a Christian band. But over time her songs became as much about questioning her faith as affirming it. And none have ever questioned it as directly as True Believer. The song starts as another memorial for the vanishing Nashville of her youth. "All our best memories were bought and then turned into apartments," she sings. "The club with all the hardcore shows, now just a grayscale dominoes." But then she turns her attention to the faith of her upbringing and the hypocrisies she sees from people who profess it. "They put up chain-link fences underneath the biggest bridges," she sings. "They pose in Christmas cards with guns as big as all the children. They say that Jesus is the way, but then they give him a white face so that they don't have to pray to someone they deem lesser than them." The line about Christmas cards with guns is likely directed at Congressman Andy Ogles, who doesn't live in Nashville but represents a portion of it, and did send out a Christmas card with him and his whole family displaying an arsenal of firearms. Then comes the song's real kicker. "The South will not rise again till it's paid for every sin. Strange fruit, hard bargain." Invoking Strange Fruit, the Billie Holiday classic about the lynching of black men, leaves no doubt about which sins of the South Williams has in mind. It's a deceptively ambitious song, connecting the ruthless machinations of the South's new money with the depredations and depravities of its old powers. And it marks Hayley Williams again as one of the great voices, and great Southern voices, of her generation. You can find both of those songs and the rest of her new material on streaming services. Waterfalls can only go up from here, can only go up from here, can only go up from here, can only go up. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. We'll talk to you soon.